What's up, TUMNAD Lectures? In this video, we are going to be looking at what we call the pancreas. If you find it helpful at the end of it all, please make sure you like the video, comment down in the comment section, and then subscribe. Let's dive in. Now, when we talk about the pancreas, we are going to be following these kind of the objectives. We will look at what we call the overview of the pancreas. We look about the location of the pancreas. We look about the endocrine role, the exocrine role, and even some little bit of what we call the histology part of what we call the pancreas. Now, the pancreas is going to be that gland that is going to be located within the epigastric region with some little portion of it extending down to what we call the umbilical region, okay? It is one of the retroperitoneal organs that are going to be residing behind what we call the peritoneum, okay? Now, looking at its anatomy, it's going to be having mainly three main parts, okay? Now, the whole of this part are the tip of this pancreas. This part here is what we call the tail, okay? Is what we call the tail of the pancreas. This is the part which is just going to be facing what we call the hilum of what we call the spleen, okay? Then when you come the whole of this part, or the largest part of what we call the pancreas, this one here is what we call the body of the pancreas, okay? And then as we come down here, this kind of the dilated structure sitting within the C-shape of what we call the duodenum. You know how it is called? This one is going to be the head of the pancreas, okay? This one here is going to be the head of the pancreas. And now, as the head of the pancreas ends, before you start the body, we have that kind of minor kind of the invagination, which very many authors take to be what we call the neck, or the neck of what we call the pancreas. So some other authors are labeling this one as what we call the neck of what we call the pancreas, okay? Now, this is the brief anatomy of what we call the pancreas, with all the parts that are going to be making it up, okay? Now, you see the whole of this tube, which is going to be residing inside what we call the center, what we call the pancreas. You know how that the tube is called? That tube is what we call the main pancreatic duct. Okay, so now this tube here in the center, this one here is what we call the main, pancreatic, duct. Okay, it is that duct that is going to be allowing movement of some of the secretions which are going to be produced by what we call the pancreas. Okay, now the pancreas is a heterocrine gland, and when I talk of a heterocrine gland, I mean it exhibits both endocrine role and even also what we call exocrine role. Let's go ahead and see, when we talk of endocrine role, exocrine role of the pancreas, what do we mean exactly? Now, looking a bit at what we call the histology of what we call the pancreas. The pancreas is going to be made up of what we call 99% of what we call the acinar cells, okay? Now, when you see the whole of this structure, you're going to be seeing that the biggest percentage of this the tissue of this the pancreas is going to be this what we are calling the acinar cells. So now, this structure here, we have just cut the whole of this portion here. We have just cut the whole of that portion here, and we have zoomed it here. This one here is what we call the acini, acini cell, okay? It's going to be having what we call a lot of what we call the acini cells. And these cells are going to be made up of what we call serous cells, okay? So now it can even be called serous acini cells. These are the cells that constitute the highest percentage of what we call the pancreas. Actually, they constitute approximately up to 99%, okay? Up to 99% of the pancreas is going to be made up of what we call the acini cells, okay? These cells, which you're calling the acini cells, they are the one playing what we call exocrine role. Now, when we talk of exocrine role, it means that these cells are going to be producing their secretions direct into what we call the ducts, okay? That's what we mean when we talk of exocrine role. Their secretions are going to be moving through what we call the ducts. In other words, all exocrine glands are going to be having ducts. Okay, that's an ideal to know that all exocrine glands are going to be having what we call ducts through which the secretions are going to be passing. Okay, Now, when we talk of the acinar cells, they are going to be producing one of the most important kind of the juice. You know how can this juice is called? They are going to be producing what we call pancreatic. Are going to be producing what we call pancreatic digestive juice. Okay, pancreatic digestive juice. And this pancreatic digestive juice is going to be rich in different enzymes. What are some of these enzymes that are going to be part of what we call pancreatic digestive juice? We have a couple of them. We have what we call pancreatic amylases. Okay, pancreatic amylases. Okay, pancreatic amylases. We also have what we call pancreatic lipases. Okay, pancreatic lipases. Then we also have what we call pancreatic proteases. Okay, pancreatic proteases. And when we talk about pancreatic proteases, these are super very many. We have a couple of them. We have a first one. We have what we call trypsin. Okay, we have what we call trypsin. This is now an active form. Then we also have what we call chymotrypsin. Okay, chymotrypsin. We also have what we call elastases. Okay, elastases. Now, these enzymes here also have what we call the carboxypeptases. Now, these kind of enzymes, which are going to be part of what we call pancreatic proteases, these ones here are going to be responsible for chemical digestion of what we call the proteins. Okay, and then when we talk about the pancreatic lipases, they are going to be dealing with what we call the fats. Okay, and even also when we talk of what we call pancreatic amylases, they are going to be dealing with what we call chemical digestion of carbohydrates. Such a beautiful cells. Okay, so now when we talk of exocrine role, this is what we are meaning, that the pancreas is going to be producing what we call the pancreatic digestive juice to release what we call this kind of pancreatic digestive enzymes. Now, the question is, who is going to be triggering these acinar cells to release the pancreatic juice? Now, when chyme arrives into what we call the duodenum, remember, this chyme is going to be containing what we call the carbohydrates, going to be containing the proteins, going to be containing the fats, and even also going to be containing what we call the hydrochloric acid coming from what we call the stomach. Now, in the duodenum, we have a specific cell that is sensitive to what we call the oligosaccharides, sensitive to what we call the partially digestive protein like peptones, and even also what we call the fatty acids. This cell is what we call the eye cell. When it is stimulated by those kind of the nutrients, they are forced to release a molecule called cholecystokinin. Cholecystokinin is going to flow into what we call the blood, and then it will go to the pancreas, specifically to this kind of the acinar cells, and it will stimulate this acinar cell to release the pancreatic digestive juices, and of which these pancreatic digestive juices are going to be containing all these kind of these enzymes that will flow into the small intestine and start the process of chemical digestion. It is such another beautiful thing. Okay. Now, that briefly covers what we call the exocrine role of the pancreas. Now, coming to what we call the endocrine role of the pancreas. When we talk about the endocrine role of the pancreas, here we mean we are going to be having hormones being secreted directly into what we call the blood. Okay, we have hormones being secreted by the pancreas and they flow direct into what we call the blood. That's what we mean by endocrine role of the pancreas. Okay, now we have a specific type of the tissue that is going to be part of what we call the pancreas. And this tissue was discovered by one of the great pathologists called Paulo Langhans. He discovered this tissue and gave it a name as the islet of the Langhans. Okay? He called it as islets of Langhans. Okay, islets of Langhans. He discovered that this tissue was super very important. However, it was only constituting 1% of the entire. It was constituting only 1%. Okay, it was constituting only 1% of the entire tissue that make up what we call the pancreas. Okay, now when he zoomed inside this kind of the islet of the Langhans tissue, he came up and observed very, very many other cells. What are some of those cells that are going to be part of what we call the islet of the Langerhans? You know, when you cut the whole of this kind of the islet of the Langerhans, these green tissues here, they are the islets of the Langerhans. So now, when you cut the whole of this tissue, you bring it here and you zoom inside, you're going to be seeing a couple of different cells. What are some of these cells that make up what you call the tissue you're calling the islet of the Langerhans? The first one, which is super very important, is what we call the beta cell. Okay, what we call the beta cells. Okay, so now these beta cells are super very important. They produce a hormone called insulin. Okay, they produce a hormone called insulin. Okay, they produce a hormone called insulin. Now, the question is, these beta cells, what is going to be their stimuli? Under what circumstances do we find that these beta cells are going to be stimulated to produce what we call the insulin? The stimulant, okay, the stimulant is going to be what we call hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia. Okay, so whenever there are high levels of the glucose, that's going to be one of the most inducing factors to stimulate the beta cell to release what we call the insulin. Okay, and of course, when insulin is produced, it's going to go into the liver and it will do the following processes. The most important one is going to be what we call glycogenesis. Okay, glycogenesis, and of which this process of glycogenesis is going to be glycogenesis, and the whole essence of glycogenesis is aiming at converting the glucose molecules into a polymer which we are calling the glycogen, and in that way we shall also be regulating what we call glucose by reducing the glucose. In that way, insulin is going to be aiding in what we call reduction of glucose. Okay, reduction of glucose, okay, by enhancing what we call glycogenesis and even also increased cellular uptake of glucose to lower the glucose down. Okay, then this was the blue cell discovered in the islet of the Langerhans. Then we also have another black cell. This black cell within part of the islet of the Langerhans. This cell is what we call the alpha. Alpha cells. These alpha cells, they produce a hormone called glucagon. Okay, they produce a hormone called glucagon. Okay, and of course, glucagon simply meaning glucose has gone. Okay, glucose has gone. So now, the main stimulant. Okay, the main stimulant of what we call the alpha cell to release what we call glucagon, because we said glucose has gone, meaning that we have low levels of the glucose. That's going to be a main stimulator of what we call the alpha cell. And this one is what we call hypoglycemia. Okay, this is what we call the main stimulant as what we call hypoglycemia. Okay, so whenever you have low levels of what we call glucose, it's going to be one of the main stimulants with the alpha cells to produce what we call glucagon, which is going to be aiming at increasing what we call the glucose level. So now, this kind of the glucagon is going to be stimulating the liver to enhance the following processes. The first one is going to be what we call glycogenolysis. Okay, and glycogenolysis is the process of breakdown of glycogen back into the glucose, and in that we shall be elevating the glucose levels. Okay, another one is going to be what we call gluconeogenesis. Okay, gluconeogenesis, and of course with gluconeogenesis, this is a process by which the liver is going to be making glucose from non-carbohydrate molecules, and in that way, if the liver manufactures glucose from non-carbohydrate molecules, we shall be now increasing the levels of glucose. In that way, the main function of these alpha cells, or what we call the glucagon, is going to be increase in glucose. Increase in glucose levels. Okay, increase in glucose levels. So now, these are the two main cells that I want to pay much attention to in what we call the islet of the Langerhans. Okay, and then we also have some other cells like what we call the D cell. Okay, the B cells, and of course these D cells are super very important. They release a hormone called somatostatin. Okay, somatostatin. Now, this hormone called somatostatin has also an inhibitory effect to the beta cells and then also what we call the alpha cells. He can go and inhibit both the alpha cells and what we call the beta cells from producing insulin and what we call glucagon. So now, these B cells producing somatostatin exerts an inhibitory effect to the alpha cells and then the beta cells. Okay. Then we also have some other cells which we call the epsilon. We have some other cells which we call the epsilon. We also have some other cells which we call the PP cells. Okay. So now the epsilon are going to be producing a chemical called the ghidin, and even also have what we call the PP cells that are also going to be part of what we call the islets of the Langerhans. Okay. So now the most important cells to pay much attention is going to be the beta cells and even also what we call the alpha cells. Okay. So now this briefly covers what we call the anatomy and some little bit of what we call the histology, what we call the pancreas. TUMNAD, I have talked a lot of things, and please, if you think whatever I've talked is making sense, is adding to you, please, you can support me, and that one can be done by a couple of means. You like the video, comment down in the comment section and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching TUMNAD as always. Until we meet next time.